It's the Black Hat Executive Spotlight Series. Terry Sweeney here with Black Hat. Joining me now is Simon Maple, Field CTO for security vendor Snyk. Simon, thanks for joining us today.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Our topic is Cloud Native AppSec. Let's start with a bit of context. Tell us a bit about what a Cloud Native app is and how it might differ from a standard application.
Yeah, absolutely. A cloud native application is an application that has been developed and written for deployment across cloud native technologies, such as perhaps serverless or containers, perhaps deployed using infrastructure as code, and ultimately a more modern deployment into these environments. And from our discussion and what we really care about from the Snyk point of view is how we can deliver those modern applications securely.
And do you consider cloud native apps and something like SaaS, are those different things, or are they cousins? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're just different styles of deployments. There are so many different ways in which people can deploy to the cloud. But I would say a cloud native application is an application which is, as an application developer, when I write this application, I'm writing it in a way whereby I know this is going to be deployed into a cloud environment. And so I use different technologies that suit that application into that environment.
So talk a bit then about the top security risks for cloud native apps. Do those mirror much of what you see with cloud in general? Do they have their own specific issues? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of the risks as we move into a more cloud native space from a kind of like a pre-cloud environment, a lot of the risks are actually kind of similar. If you're working on some VM which is running somewhere not on a cloud perhaps, and you have a port open, you're going to have a similar risk if there's a port open in a container that you're deploying somewhere in a cloud environment. The style of risks are similar, but the way in which those risks, those vulnerabilities present themselves, or should I say, are introduced into that stack differ quite significantly. And I think previously where you might want an IT security solution to identify where your risks are previously in maybe a virtual machine or something like that. Now in a cloud native application world where these similar risks, similar vulnerabilities and misconfigurations are still being added, but they're being added potentially by developers, DevOps teams in container config, Docker files, and those kind of things. So I think a lot of the risks are similar, but the way in which those risks are introduced and the way in which we, as individuals, teams, and organizations, need to think about fixing those risks and identifying where those risks are, that's the area for me that has changed very, very significantly.
What advice then do you have for companies or organizations that are thinking of creating some sort of cloud native security program?
Yeah, great question. And I would say test often very much is one of the big keys, as we already know. I think with the faster release cycles that we have with kind of like DevOps flows and things like that, it's very, very important to make sure, first of all, that we're testing throughout the SDLC. And that's not just, at one point, but it could be in our IDEs, in our command line interface, in our Git repos, all the way through to CI production and beyond in a monitoring capacity. So I would say, first of all, doing it in lots of different places, but secondly, empowering the people who are writing the code. So for example, someone who's touching a Docker file, do they know when they're making those changes, or when someone's playing and maintaining a configuration like a Terraform script, do they know what is secure and what isn't secure? What are the different areas of tooling that they should be using? So as a developer, for example, I should be testing various things: SaaS, I should be testing SCA, I should be testing infrastructure as code and container testing as well as I write my code. So I would say testing throughout the SDLC and testing the various levels of the cloud native stack as I develop.
Ownership of a process, security management, all those sorts of things is an issue with these kinds of third-party arrangements. The cloud providers don't make it easy by having very different requirements or things that they will take ownership of, that sort of thing. All that being said, from your perspective, who should own the security of a cloud native app?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And I think every organization will do it differently. Some people will have, security team zone, development team zone, DevOps team zone, or some mix in between. Times when we use things like serverless, there will be a joint ownership, for example, between the cloud vendor and ourselves, depending on whether it's operating systems packages that maybe you would expect a cloud vendor to look after, and the application libraries, etc., that we as application developers look after. But I would say there's two things. I think developers need to own the security in their development workflow. So as they're adding libraries, as they're adding code, they need to be able to test, understand the results, and fix as early as possible. So that needs to be a security ownership there. I think the guardrails and the security policies and things like that, that the dev teams need to work in, that's the kind of thing that needs to be owned by the security team. So there's a split in responsibility there. And I think different individuals and roles need to own different pieces of that process. So yeah, overall, I think there is a joint responsibility and a joint ownership of that. But the core thing is empowering development teams to be able to own and fix the code, the security of the code they write. And so there's an inherent ownership there that developers need to take on.
Some great insights and advice on Cloud Native AppSec. Simon, thanks for joining us for this Black Hat Executive Spotlight today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We've been talking with Simon Maple, Field CTO for Snyk. This has been Terry Sweeney for Black Hat. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.